Once upon a time, or maybe twice, there was an unearthly paradise called Pepperland.
Hello everybody, this is TJR. If this is your first time here, welcome to the channel. If not, welcome back. Yellow Submarine, the movie, was directed by George Dunning. It opened in theaters on July 17th, 1968 in the United Kingdom, and on November 13th, the same year, in the United States. Now, earlier that year saw the release of 2001, A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick. And honestly, I can't help but see a few similarities. Both films during their time were considered to be head trip movies, and both had their share of audiences arriving to screenings completely baked. But there are some other comparisons that I would like to make as well. 2001: A Space Odyssey was a revolution in cinema, both for how science fiction was portrayed in motion pictures, taking the genre seriously in a way that no one else had since MGM had released Forbidden Planet back in 1956, and for its groundbreaking special effects. Yellow Submarine was equally groundbreaking in its visuals and also as an animated film. The movie was psychedelic and surreal, but it also contained a sense of whimsy that made it accessible to audiences of all ages. When it arrived, no other animated film had looked like it previously, and I would even go as far as to say that no other animated film has looked like it since. But that doesn't mean it was created in a vacuum. The film was very much reflecting the pop art scene of the time, and I can make some comparison in terms of visual style and tone to some of the more surreal pre-code Betty Boop cartoons of the 1930s, produced by the Fleischer Studios.
Gee, that's good stuff.
I'll say it's good.
In his introduction to the DVD and Blu-ray remastering of the film, John Lasseter stated, "Animation is an art form for all ages. This has been true from the very beginning. Mickey Mouse and the classic Warner Brothers cartoons were part of a great studio tradition in which an animated short film before the feature was an integral part of the movie-going experience. And Walt Disney's landmark animated feature films drew adults, teens, and children alike. But when television programmers in the 1950s started airing cartoons only during the hours when children watched, after school and on Saturday mornings, it changed the public's perception of animation. By the 1960s, most studios had shut down their theatrical animation divisions, and the medium was soon considered just for kids. So when Yellow Submarine came out in 1968, it was a real shot in the arm for animation. The film, with its innovative visual style, was clearly not just for children, but for everyone who could appreciate its amazing cinematic interpretation of the Beatles' music, and it reintroduced people of all ages to animation as an art form.
That's better.
And I would agree with that assessment and state that the film's influence is still being felt today, which makes it all the more ironic when you consider that Yellow Submarine primarily came to be because the Beatles didn't want to have to make another live-action feature.
Help! I need somebody. Help! Not just anybody. Help! You know I need some.
After their experience shooting 1965's Help, the Beatles were, shall we say, less than enthused about making another movie. But they still owed United Artists one more motion picture. So the idea of making an animated film seemed a lot more favorable. Initial press for the film reported that the Beatles would provide their own character voices for the film, but the production team at TBC Studios found it impossible to be able to get all four Beatles into a recording studio for the film. So, just like the Beatles' Saturday morning cartoon show, the Fab Four's animated counterparts would be portrayed by voice actors. The real Beatles, of course, would make a live-action appearance at the end of the film, and there are some conflicting accounts on this matter, with some stating that After seeing the film, the Beatles were pleased enough with it that they decided to film the ending, and others stating that in order to complete their contractual obligation with United Artists, that they actually had to appear in the film. Who knows? Perhaps there's truth to both. The actual production and animation for the film was handled by TVC Studios, which was co-owned by director George Dunning and John Kowitz, who served as production supervisor for the film. Dunning would be the overall director and would supervise over 200 artists for 11 months. Both director George Dunning and TVC Studios actually did work on the Beatles TV cartoon series for ABC TV previously. Admittedly, this connection to the cartoon TV series could have led anyone to assume, including the Fab Four, that the film would just be a longer version of the TV series, and Al Brodax, who was producer, or I should say the money for the film, was thinking that that would in fact be the direction that the film would go in. But in his commentary for the DVD and Blu-ray release of the film, production supervisor John Kowitz stated that since this was going to be a theatrical release, and since audiences would be expected to pay a ticket price to see it, that they felt that the film had to be more than just a longer episode of the TV series. He also stated that he wanted the film to reflect the youth culture that was happening all around London at that time, and that they wanted the film to appeal to not only teenagers, but to kids, and maybe even, as he put it, the grown-ups as well. It was this desire that led them to German artist Heinz Edelmann, whose unique designs gave the film its unique look, completely divorcing it from the aforementioned TV show. The film is based on the Lennon-McCartney penned tune of the same name, and John Kowitz recounts there being very little restrictions as to what Beatle tracks they could use for the film. A good majority of the songs used in the film were previously released on other Beatle albums, but the film did include 4 previously unreleased tracks: Only a Northern Song, All Together Now, It's All Too Much, and Hey Bulldog. Some reports state that Baby You're a Rich Man was recorded for the film, but that song did appear on the US and now official version of Magical Mystery Tour album, so I'm not counting it as such. As for these 4 original songs, it's well known that, with the exception of Bulldog, the Beatles themselves felt that these were kind of their leftovers, and they figured just let them use them in the film. Critics over the years have also pretty much dissed these 4 original songs that are featured on the Yellow Submarine album. I will say that I completely disagree with some of the critical reaction that I have read over the years regarding these 4 tracks and the idea that they are just disposable. It's All Too Much, with its Hendrix-esque like guitar opening, and Only a Northern Song with its dark, ominous church organ introduction, not to mention its noise as sound design, are both very cutting-edge entries into the psychedelic genre by the Beatles. It's All Too Much and Only a Northern Song are, in my opinion, some of the most cutting-edge entries into the psychedelic genre that the Beatles have produced. All Together Now is a very rollicking but also very charming children's song. Shameless plug. By the way, I do talk about not only this track, but some other lesser discussed Beatles songs like Piggies and Goodnight in a previous video entitled The Beatles' Influence That No One Talks About. I thought this was a great video, but it never got the love it deserved, so I want to put a little bit of spotlight on it right now. I'll leave a link for you if you want to check it out. End of shameless plug. And even though he says that the song means nothing, John Lennon still regards Hey Bulldog as a great rock and roll tune. And decades later, musician Dave Grohl would refer to it as a quintessential Beatles track. In addition to the Beatles songs used in the film, I also want to give a shout out to George Martin's orchestral score as well. Along with the film's whimsical sense of humor, George Martin's very beautiful and pastoral score helps to balance out the more surreal elements of the film, and I really feel makes it more accessible to a wider audience. As for the film's story, well, it's very simple. The peaceful world of Pepperland is under siege by the music-hating Blue Meanies. They are saved by the Fab Four, who melt the hearts of the Blue Meanies by showing them that all you need is love. The end. Most of the film's actual action and story take place during the film's pre-opening credit scene, which takes up less than 10 minutes of its running time, and then the final quarter of the film. The rest is just the Beatles getting to their destination. A lot of the film's criticism has centered on the characterizations, or I should say the lack thereof. And I guess that's true. The protagonists really are kind of one note with zero character arcs. The only exception possibly being Ringo, who starts the film feeling sad and without purpose. So I guess he does feel different by the end of the film, but the movie gives us no indication that this is in fact the case, so I'm kind of just assigning a character arc to him. Otherwise, the Beatles themselves are portrayed in this film as just some very chill dudes who humorously joke their way around just about any situation.
Hey lads, now Ringo's gone, what are we going to do?
Learn to sing trios.
No, let's save the poor devil.
That is, of course, until the ending, when they actually have to be proactive against the Blue Meanies. In the journey leading up to this moment, however, they just kind of go with the flow of whatever is happening around them. In this respect, the film does bear a lot of resemblance to Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. Alice falls down a rabbit hole where she encounters a lot of weird and unusual things until she makes her way back home. She has zero story arc in that story. And that's fine, because just like Alice in Wonderland, this film is not really about characters or plot. It's mostly about taking in a pleasant and fun psychedelic experience. During the whole Alice in Wonderland portion of this film, all the strange and bizarre situations and deadpan humor are just there to keep your attention until it's time to showcase another Beatles song. Martin Scorsese's argument regarding superhero films being like amusement park rides would certainly apply to Yellow Submarine. The film is a ride. It's an experience. Just enjoy it. For me, however, Yellow Submarine holds a significant place in my personal musical experience because it was my first exposure to the music of the Beatles. Let me set the stage for you. I was a young teenager, still a kid really, and by this time, the Fab Four had already broken up. As I began to watch the film, I remember hearing the title track and thinking, I think I've heard this song somewhere before. But nothing could prepare me for the Eleanor Rigby scene that came next. The 3D-like cutout animation scene that preceded the track really startled me. But even more startling was the music that followed.
Look at all the lonely people.
Again, my knowledge of popular music at this point was very small. And leading up to it, my only real knowledge of the Beatles was that they were a band that once existed, that they had long shaggy hair, and that they sang a song that went, yeah, yeah, yeah. So this would be my first time hearing the song Eleanor Rigby. And hearing the song combined with the visuals of the film honestly made my jaw drop. This was the Beatles? I asked myself. This was the group that sings yeah, yeah, yeah? This song, Eleanor Rigby, was dark, ominous, and profoundly sad. There was no guitar, bass, or drums in it. It was performed by a string quartet and sounded more classical than rock and roll. And then, of course, there were those amazing vocal harmonies. It honestly was one of the most life-changing musical moments that I had ever experienced, and I will never forget it. Prior to this film, I had only just begun listening to top 40 music on the radio, but nothing I had heard so far sounded anything like this. Later, the film would continue to surprise me again as I learned that the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was actually not originally recorded by Elton John.
Lucy in the sky with diamonds.
Whose remake was currently on the charts at that time. Yes, my first exposure to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was Elton John's cover of the song. Until Yellow Submarine, I had no clue that his recording was a cover. This movie was my gateway drug to the Beatles, and it was my first indication that the world of popular music was larger than I could have imagined, and that said history went far beyond my own experience. Yellow Submarine was, and always will be, not only my favorite Beatle movie, but also one of my favorite animated movies also. In his commentary, John Coates made the point that it's nothing short of a miracle that Yellow Submarine began production without a final script and without a final storyboard, but that it still got made in the space of 11 months. All of this worked against the film, but working in its favor was the fact that everyone working on the film, including Coates himself, felt incredibly inspired by the music of the Beatles, and that this single thing, more than anything else, carried them through those 11 months, and it shows on every frame. This is TJR. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to click a like, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon. If you'd like to show an additional level of support, please consider becoming a patron supporter. And if you can't do that, I understand. Just clicking like will make a big difference for this channel. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear about your personal thoughts on the film. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.